about my trucking career. My so-called midlife crisis was actually a health crisis, and to be more precise, it was actually a mental health crisis. I'd had problems with sleep since I first started doing shift work in my early 20s. Probably closely related to the shift work-induced sleep problems was problems with depression and anxiety, first noticeable in my mid-20s and subsequently ignored for far too long. And just for the sake of parody, I have to mention that at that time in my life I was abusing substances at least occasionally, which certainly did not improve my mental health condition. The things we do to cope. I first sought medical help with my depression in my mid-30s, and the help that I got really didn't help much at all. I job hopped a lot. The average time I stayed on a job was around 4 years. This job hopping was partially due to chasing better opportunities and partly due to inadequately treated anxiety and major depression. I admitted myself to a behavioral health hospital for depression for the first time at age 45. I had been prescribed Prozac for depression by a general practitioner doctor about a year earlier, and I should have stopped taking it, but as is so often the case with behavioral health issues, I did not see the blindingly obvious problems in my own thought patterns and behavior until it was nearly too late. After that first hospitalization, I returned to work as a mechanical design engineer and was able to work for about another year, at which time I had a pretty major crisis and walked out the back door of the office and never looked back. That led to about 5 years of homelessness, couch surfing, and living in group homes. During that time, I admitted myself once again for treatment of major depression, and it was during this hospitalization that I was given the diagnosis of recurring severe major depression. Ironically enough, I didn't even know what problematic anxiety looked or felt like, and that I was suffering with it until I was nearly 60 years old. Once I finally gained an understanding of what anxiety actually is and looks like, I realized that I had been dealing with a pretty serious case of anxiety alongside major depression for decades. After about 5 years of homelessness and couch surfing, I re-entered the workforce. I held a few short-term jobs, such as construction, cleanup, working in a banking call center, working as a machine assembly technician, structural drafting, and document control. This was when I got tired of go-nowhere part-time jobs and decided to take the plunge and try to get my Class A commercial driver's license. The process of getting my CDL wasn't exactly smooth sailing for me. For my first attempt, I signed on with a small 70-truck fleet flatbed carrier operating out of Missoula, Montana. It was a really bizarre situation. The safety director was an old-school trucker in his early 70s who was really very burnt out and probably should have retired years before then. His assistant was how to be polite about this. The assistant safety director was an intellectually below-average good old boy type with far more ambition than anything else. These two were at each other's back constantly. There was a tremendous amount of passive-aggressive bullshit and a lot of screaming and yelling. It was one of the most unhealthy work environments I had encountered in my nearly 40 years of work, and I had been in some doozies. After about 2 weeks of this, I had enough of the misplaced anger, projection, and enough of being screamed at, and I left the so-called training program with no CDL. I worked about another year of dead-end jobs, and that was when I committed and enrolled in a CDL training program with a very large national carrier, one of the largest training company trucking fleets in the nation, which I will refer to as Tom's Transportation. The cost of the training program was about $4,000 to be paid back after finishing the program. I'm going to talk a little bit about some trucking terminology and then tell you a little bit about my experiences as a long-haul over-the-road trucker. First, some terminology. Those great big trucks that you see everywhere with a truck and a trailer, which most people call big rigs or semis, are actually correctly referred to as semi-trailer tractor rigs. A semi-trailer is a trailer with an axle or sets of axles at only one end of the trailer, as opposed to a full trailer, which would maybe have been pulled by a team of horses or mules or a tractor, which has axles at both ends of the trailer and can stand on its own. The big truck that the semi-trailer is attached to is a highway tractor, or simply a tractor. Hence, it is correctly referred to as a semi-trailer tractor rig or a big rig, so when you hear a trucker talking about a tractor, he's not referring to a piece of really cool and expensive green farm machinery. He's referring to his truck minus the trailer, his tractor. I will use the acronyms CDL and OTR, referring to commercial driver's license and over-the-road trucking. The CDL training at Tom's Transportation was decent but not great. How much a student got out of the training program was, like so many things in life, very dependent on the effort and attention that the student put into it. I put a lot of effort, attention, and energy into it. After an intensive 3-week mix of classroom instruction and hands-on training, a lot of study in the evenings, and road training in an older Volvo tractor with a 13-speed manual transmission, I passed my state written, oral, and driving tests, and I got my Class A commercial driver's license in September 2017 at age 55. I then spent about 5 weeks in a 2-bunk sleeper tractor with a trainer driver, ironically referred to by the company as a mentor, hauling loads all over the lower 48 United States. This training period was, at best, a very challenging experience. It was 5 very intense and stressful weeks in a confined space with a total stranger. We had very little in common other than our age, and we really didn't like each other very much. I doubt we would have been friends if we had ever met in any sort of social setting. This particular trainer, who I shall refer to as Dirg, had been taking on and training student drivers nearly non-stop for about 9 years, and to say that he was burned out on it and badly in need of a change is to put it politely and mildly. The single most memorable experience of that time in training was on my very first run with Dirg in his tractor. Dirg picked me up at the terminal in northern Idaho. We had a load headed for southern Utah. Dirg drove the first couple 100 miles, and then I took over just north of the Utah border. Driving into Salt Lake City on Interstate 15 during bumper-to-bumper afternoon rush hour with less than 20 hours of experience driving a big rig was definitely one of the more, shall we say, exciting experiences of my life. Okay, I'm not going to pretty it up for the sake of masculinity. It was terrifying. The way it was done at Tom's Transportation was that the so-called mentor got paid not only for the miles he himself drove, but also for the miles driven by the probationary student driver. So there was a lot of financial motivation for the so-called mentor to burn himself out by training too much. Training was really the only way for a driver to make a decent paycheck at Tom's Trucking. They're definitely at the very low end of the trucking company pay scale, which is true of most so-called training companies. One of the many ways in which the training program at Tom's Transportation was lacking was in route planning. In trucking, and especially with a big rig, route planning can easily make the difference between a successful, uneventful run and total disaster, and this is even more important for a new driver. A standard semi-trailer tractor rig is almost 75 feet long. You don't park one of those monsters just any old place, and there are a lot of roads and parking areas which are either unsafe for or legally prohibited to a big rig. Successful trucking takes quite a bit of planning. Tom's Transportation spent very little training time during the in-class sessions teaching route planning. The training driver is required to teach route planning to the probationary student driver, but my trainer spent exactly 0 time teaching me anything related to routing. It was not even mentioned. Dirg would plug the route into the dash-mounted GPS unit, and I was taught to follow the little blue arrow. That was it for route planning and training. Just follow the little blue arrow. At any rate, I managed to survive that 5 weeks of hell and signed on with that same company, Tom's Transportation, as an over-the-road, or OTR, long-haul Class A commercial truck driver. In early October 2017, I picked up my first solo dry van load from a very large regional grocery distribution center in Loveland, Colorado, and pulled it uneventfully to a local distribution center in Ogden, Utah. I delivered that first load of groceries on time without incident. I spent my first solo night in a sleeper cab at Wagon Hound Rest Area in Wyoming on Interstate 80 near Elk Mountain. It was one of the best nights sleep I ever had, and that rest area is, to this day, one of my absolute favorite rest areas. I had some very memorable experiences in the year that I stayed at that first OTR CDL job with Tom's Transportation. During my first few weeks in that first tractor, a 3-year-old Freightliner Cascadia with an AMT, or automated manual transmission, and also a fair amount of body damage, I noticed that the tractor was pulling hard to one side while at highway speed. During my first home time, after about 5 weeks on the road solo, I got approval from dispatch to take it to a local alignment shop near my home for a front end alignment. It turned out that one of the front axles was bent, so the alignment didn't improve the situation at all. I had to drive it that way for another few weeks until Tom's Transportation could route me to one of their larger terminals for a replacement tractor. A few more weeks into that job with Tom's Transportation, I got into a pretty heated argument with the dispatcher about an issue at a delivery site in Kent, Washington. I won't go into the details except to say that it was a customer service issue. I was right, the dispatcher was wrong, and I was very agitated. Immediately after this argument, dispatch wanted me to bobtail, or drive the tractor only with no trailer, to another location about 30 miles away to pick up a loaded trailer. The address they had given me would not load correctly into my GPS, and I didn't know how to plan the route manually, but the dispatcher was pissed off at me and verbally forced me to get my tractor on the road right now with nothing but an address. So in a highly agitated state, I started driving bobtail with very little idea where I was even headed. In an effort to make a long story short, I sideswiped a passenger car while changing lanes to my right, into my right-hand mirror blind spot with the sun in my eyes. This was a very low-speed collision, maybe 25 miles an hour, probably less, and the damage to the car was negligible since it was only one of my tires which rubbed the car and rubbed it very lightly. But I mean, I get it. A highway tractor, even bobtail, is pretty intimidating to a person in a low-slung passenger car, and my tires were coming at this poor lady on her driver's side. I mean, right where she is, right at her. So yeah, she was a bit upset. Freaked out, you might say. Anyhow, the cops were too busy that day to respond to a non-injury collision with less than $1,500 of damage, so I didn't even get a well-deserved ticket for an unsafe lane change. I did, however, do my best to get the other driver calmed down, and honestly, I felt awful about it. And I do want to add a side note here. It may sound like I'm blaming the dispatcher for forcing me to drive in an agitated state of mind. Absolutely not. That was 100% my own fault. I should have recognized that I was too agitated to drive safely, and I should have taken 15 or 20 minutes to get my head on right. Relax. Om Mani Padme Hum. Deep breathing, etc. But I didn't do that. I started driving, and the responsibility is all my own.